Welcome back to the Demon Slayer comparison series. Today we'll be covering episode 7 of the District Arc, which covers the remainder of chapter 83, as well as chapter 84, 85, and 86. Things are going to get real intense in this episode, so without further ado, let's get started. But before we do, two quick things. I never actually said this before, but these videos are entirely spoiler-free. No future content in the manga will be covered besides that which each episode is adapting. Secondly, and for that reason, there are some things that can't or simply shouldn't be mentioned with respect to anime-only watchers. I made a semi-spoiler mistake last video in which some manga readers might have picked up on. This mistake has since been rectified, but it made me realize that all future fact checks will be made from a strict anime-only perspective from here on out, with little to no conjecture for credibility's sake. As we get into the section with Daki's past, you'll see what I mean. Sorry for the confusion, everyone. Alright, now let's get into the episode. After a short recap in the opening, we jumpstart the adaptation of chapter 83 on page 18, where we left off with Nezuko's foot in Daki's back. Most of this is the same, but when Nezuko pulls her foot out, we watch her play with her food a bit more by stomping one of Daki's arms off. With this extremely ominous music in the background, this scene now feels darker than ever, and Tanjiro's brother seems to realize this in the little dream world, which is now snowing interestingly enough, as he wakes up Tanjiro to help his sister. And now we're done with chapter 83. Yep, that's really all that was left. So now let's move on to chapter 84. As we switch back to Daki and Nezuko, we get some quite gruesome anime exclusive footage of Nezuko curb stomping Daki. I might not like Daki that much, but man, those screams hit differently. You can really tell how much pain she's in. It's when Daki decides that she's finally had enough that we officially start the adaptation of chapter 84. This part has some minor changes. First off, when Daki retaliates, we see Nezuko fly back a little bit, but in the manga this happens while Nezuko's first kick still resides in Daki's back. We also get a slightly better depiction of Nezuko's blood flying onto Daki. After Daki regains some of her composure, just like her battle with Tanjiro, she now gains some additional distance before attacking with her obi again, whereas she does this as she's just getting up in the manga. After Nezuko stops that attack with her disassembled limbs and uses her blood on Daki to set her on fire, we get some additional PTSD footage from Daki. This time around we can confirm that these are indeed her memories, with an additional anime exclusive line of her saying, as it turns out, the only scene from this flashback that actually comes from the manga is when her hand reaches out for someone else's. But this event is still mostly a mystery for now. As Daki goes through an existential crisis, Nezuko decides to add some fuel to her fire by going on another stomping rampage with the same right leg that was cut off so many times. Interestingly enough, Daki is no longer on fire like she is in the manga as Nezuko has her fun. It would have been even more savage if she was still on fire, but the additional movements of Nezuko more than make up for that, as her first stomp gets some additional airtime before it lands. We also now get the depiction of Daki trying to come up for air at one point, but that was pretty short-lived. And there's another anime exclusive scene here. Instead of just kicking Daki straight into the building, she instead kicks her down the street with a good old 1-2 before chasing her down mid-flight to do a mid-air kick into the two buildings. With how much damage that's been done to the district thus far, this place is really gonna need to be remodeled soon. She kicked her through at least 2 buildings in the manga, and maybe even more in the anime. As Nezuko enters the nearly demolished building and spots the injured woman, she noticeably has a little more restraint this time as she stares down the woman a bit more with wide eyes and chattering teeth. Besides that though, most of this is spot on. As Tanjiro tries to stop his sister, he mentions that he can smell her blood everywhere, but in this scene in particular, that blood isn't there anymore. Kind of a small detail, but still worth mentioning. As Nezuko sends them both flying through the ceiling together, the room they land in is noticeably smaller, as these two are basically one step away from falling through the hole. You can really feel Tanjiro's desperation to get Nezuko under control in the anime, as we see clouds of dust flying in the air while the brightness levels alternate on Tanjiro and Nezuko's faces. It's effects like this that work really well in creating an on-edge response for most viewers. It's a good thing that no one ever cleaned this building, because that dust makes everything feel so much more atmospheric. Now this is the part where Daki comes back to say hi to the siblings, although it is a little confusing how she breaks through the wall next to them. After all, aren't they on the second floor now? I believe Daki was shot into the first floor, although maybe she landed in a different building to begin with. In the manga, we can see a clear-cut path to the outside after all, or we could just assume she took the stairs. Either way, it would be nice if we got a cut-up wall instead of a simply destroyed one. It fits her attack style so much better. Now, there are still 4 other humans in the room as Daki arrives, and interestingly enough, the 2 women here are already hiding behind a door, whereas in the anime they're still standing around in shock. I kinda like the anime a little better, because if they have the whereabouts to play hide and seek around the corner, they should have just left at this point. Now this is the point where Uzui arrives, and this time he gets a flashy entrance instead of just suddenly appearing in front of Tanjiro's face. Now we watch him burst through a door with some quick sword work before catching up with Tanjiro. This is the sword work that most likely decapitated Daki, as we'll find out in just a moment. As Uzui is lecturing Tanjiro, he gets one additional line at the end of him saying that no one asked for Nezuko Nezuko to turn into a demon. It is nice that we get to see a closer view of a cartoonified Nezuko this time. Despite the situation, it's still kind of oddly adorable. Just a little later, as Uzui says how weak Daki is, she gets one more anime-exclusive chance to spout her nonsense before her head finally falls into her lap. This is what officially ends out Chapter 84 and brings us right into the commercial break. Now, for the commercial break cuts, the first one was a little tricky to find. It's actually a rough sketch for the cover page of Volume 10. I believe one of you brought this to my attention in the comments, but for the life of me, I can't find that comment anymore. Regardless, you know who you are, so thank you very much. The second one was a bit easier though. It comes from the title page on Chapter 84. After the commercial break, we start off with some fun anime-exclusive stuff of Inosuke and Zenko trying to find Uzui. It seems like Uzui moved just too fast for them this time, as it requires Zenko to use his ears to put them back in the right direction. It's after this bit that we start up the adaptation of Chapter 85, with shocked Tanjiro looking at decapitated Daki. Around this time we get an anime-only depiction of the two women from earlier finally running away. It seems that the other two didn't leave because the woman here was a little too close to the action and needed time to catch her breath. Important information going forward. After the siblings fly out of the building and back to the ground floor, this is where Tanjiro sings a lullaby for Nezuko. UfoTable made this scene as beautiful as they could, with a couple of meaningful changes. Now as Tanjiro tries to calm his sister down, he grabs her hand real tight as Nezuko's vision is slowly engulfed in light. These two things create the perfect transition into Nezuko laying in her mother's arms as she sings the lullaby for her. Now, during the lullaby, Crunchyroll translates it as if the mother ate the red berries, but pretty much every other version says that the mother ate the fruit from the red tree. I'm fairly certain that Crunchyroll got this one right, as Akai no Kinomi should mean red berries, but let me know what you Japanese speakers think. It's after the lullaby ends that multiple Demon Slayer fan hearts were broken, as Nezuko bawls tears of sorrow with some of the saddest music since the end of the Mugen Train arc. This scene really makes me feel bad for Nezuko. Her pain has been mostly silent this whole time, so seeing her let it all out like this really makes my heart ache. But now we're back to Uzui and Daki, where the anime reminds us that these two are still here listening to them argue. As far as the manga goes, Viz Media did make Daki say that she earned her upper rank in all bold letters, but whether she earned it or not is up for debate. Even Uzui has a hard time believing it, and it's that denial that inevitably brings Daki to tears. Now this might make me sound like a horrible person, but after everything Daki's done, seeing her cry like this really puts a joyful smile on my face. Miyuki Sawashiro, the woman who voice acts Daki, really knows how to do the role of an arrogant grown-up child. As Daki is throwing a temper tantrum, we now see Uzui get his sword ready this time, as he can tell something isn't quite right. And he would be right in this assumption, as this is when Gyutaro shows up for the very first time. UfoTable did his appearance so well, as now we watch him emerge from the shadows before we watch him crawl out like a parasite. As we can see, Uzui wastes no time in attacking. He goes in so fast that he blasts his way into the adjacent room this time. I love this scene because with all the pauses that characters usually do in anime, this sort of response time is a breath of fresh air. Also, who doesn't like slow-mo cuts like this? They really took a 3-slash attack from the manga and made it 10 times more epic. Regardless of how fast Uzui is though, this guy is no easy kill, as he and his sister warp out of the way before the blades can even hit. As Gyutaro checks up on his sister, I have to stop and say that they chose a really sinister voice for this guy. It's delightfully chilling and broken sounding, and it fits the character design to a T. Props to Ryota Osaka, the voice actor for this character. You might have noticed by this point that Daki is missing some of her hair pieces in the manga. Sometimes it leaves, sometimes it comes back, you'll see. Some shots might just have it obscured, or maybe they fell out and she decided to put him back in a little later in the manga. Either way, I'm not going to mention this every single time it comes up. As far as the dialogue after Uzui's attack goes, this is all pretty much spot on. Except Viz Media does leave out the part where Gyutaro says that Daki isn't the smartest girl. I guess it can be assumed from these two lines, but it's still worth mentioning. Uzui going in for his second attack is far more interesting though, so let's talk about that. This collision here is several hits in one, as shown in a total of 10 frames, which is less than half a second. Here we can associate the blue slashes as Uzui's and the red slashes as Gyutaro's, as Uzui's first attack was clearly blue. Keep in mind this is mostly conjecture here, but I think we can assume that most of the straight lines here are offensive attacks and the wavy ones are defensive moves. I say this because the first offensive move was clearly done by Uzui. The second strike also looks pretty similar, so we can assume Uzui struck again with his second sword. There is one frame here which I'm unsure of if it's an attack or not, but it seems like an after effect from the second strike, at least to my eye. The last strike was clearly initiated by Gyutaro though, as it moves from a wavy line into a straight one. This is the attack that Uzui was barely able to deflect on time. It's a really cool first encounter because all of these colored lines flying around is kind of similar to how Rengoku and Akaza kicked off their battle in the Mugen Train arc. After their first engagement though, I did notice that the two people who should still be to the right of the window aren't there anymore in the manga. Canonically speaking, they shouldn't have left yet, so maybe they went for a short walk to the other side of the room? Either way, after these two finish their attacks, we get that awesome light effect from earlier with some blur and camera movement before getting into the two remaining shots of Gyutaro and Uzui that would end chapter 85. And now we move right along into chapter 86 with some vacant narration panels of Gyutaro's origin. For the anime-only crowd, here's the summary. Gyutaro, or Gyu for short, is more of a title than a name itself. It refers to those who would bring customers into red light districts. As of now in the anime, it's unknown why he adopted this name for himself, but like many other demons, he can't remember much of his past to begin with. I did a lot of research on this name to see what I can pull from it, and the most I got from the kanji of the name was this. Interesting. We'll just have to see if that pans out in future episodes. After that description on page 1, page 2 is when we actually continue the adaptation process with Gyutaro complimenting Uzui and his stunning figure. There is a little bit of Viz Media mistranslation here. Gyutaro is supposed to say that in addition to how beefy Uzui is, that he himself can't gain weight like that. Instead, he just tells Uzui to not get fat. And a little later, he's supposed to say that he'll send Uzui flying around, but he never does say that. Whether it's Viz Media or otherwise, most of the translations I've looked at are kind of all over the place for Gyutaro and his broken way of speaking. Besides the translations though, most of the manga itself is pretty on point with the anime, although position-wise, shouldn't Uzui be standing almost right where the hole is? Talk about standing on edge. Now this is where the real battle with Uzui and Gyutaro gets underway. UfoTable's work this time was very hard to identify, but nonetheless, let's try to break this down as best we can. To start, we now get a better depiction of Gyutaro actually throwing his sickles at Uzui before they burst out of the building. We only see one of them fly out of the roof though, maybe because the other one came out of the window in the manga. As far as Gyutaro's attacks go, there is some wild 3D and 2D stuff going on here, so let's address that first before anything else. First up, the sickles. Besides the point where they slow down in front of Uzui, it can be very hard to distinguish when they're fully rendered or fully drawn out. As for how they did shots like this one, there are a few things that could have been done here. 1. This is just a straight 3D object with a spinning texture and some motion blur. 2. A god tier 2D animator made this with nearly flawless easing movement. Or 3. They synergized the best of both worlds by drawing in different states of the Scythe itself and wrapping it around a 3D mesh. Only the studio itself would truly know the answer, but comment down below which one you think it is. Maybe there's an option 4 I haven't considered. Regardless of how UfoTable did this, I think we can all agree that they knocked it out of the park with these scythes. I mean, just look at the shading and how it changes as the scythe becomes more vertical with the camera. They truly are the kings of their craft. We'll cover Gyutaro's pure blood demon art attacks in just a bit, but let's get back to the comparison first. Now that Inosuke and Zenko have arrived, we get one absent narration panel saying that Inosuke has been influenced by Uzui's terminology before Tanjiro starts doing a stationary run with Nezuko. Really everything up to when Gyutaro does his next attack is pretty much identical. There are some things that have been moved around a bit slightly, but it's nothing too big. Now this is when Gyutaro attacks with his blood demon art for the first time, with some 6 Sakuga that I believe is done by Nozomu Abe yet again. The build up this guy has for his flying blood sickles is so authentic to his nature as a clearly disturbed character. The liquid effects this guy produces looks as fluid as Tanjiro's water breathing with all the thickness of Hinokami Kagura. A lot of this is done on 2s, but the fluidity displayed here is top notch. And when it is done on 1s like right here, the shading of the blood getting mixed around fits perfectly with the goo-like state of the blood itself. While this shot clearly got the best budget, this gooey-like feel of the blood remains consistent for all future attacks. After Uzui uses a flash bomb to avoid the attack and free up the 2 remaining civilians, we get some even more blood attacks from Gyutaro that have some more black mixed in this time. The graphic design of this attack, dubbed the turn or bend version of flying blood sickles, has almost this watercolor feeling to it with subtle shimmer effects around the rough edges. This design work mixed with consistent compositional and coloring values makes it difficult for the average viewer to tell whether it's being displayed in 3D or 2D. This is how you know UfoTable does pretty much everything in-house. All of these artists are probably just a few seats away from each other. As if UfoTable wasn't going crazy enough, they decide to do this transition from Uzui into a 3D rendered space of the building he's in. It's so sick that even as these black sound waves emit from Uzui, you can even see some of the furniture if you look closely enough, as well as Daki and Gyutaro, who are still on the second floor. After Uzui does that, we get some more Sakuga of him twisting around to hit his ninja balls before the entire air is engulfed in light. As far as how this all compares to the manga, there really isn't too much to mention here. In the manga, the couple is still hanging around by the time Uzui fights off the bending move, but everything else is pretty much par for the course. As usual, UfoTable remained very faithful to the source material while employing some of the most standout technologically marvelous techniques the industry has to offer. We even get the depiction of the Obi ball falling to the ground this time too. My mind was so confused at this point that I had to remind myself that this was a 3D scene. With every effect on the screen, from the lighting to the dust to the shading to the camera movement to the blur, there's so much going on that it's hard to forget that you're actually looking at CG sometimes. It's perfectly insane how much work goes into just one cut in this show. And speaking of cuts, we're now now at the final one of this episode as we see Daki riding on the shoulders of her brother. Unlike last time, this cut will actually finish out the chapter so we can start fresh next week. So now that the episode is over, it's numbers time. Episode 7 had a normal runtime of about 24 minutes with about 19 minutes of canonical content. This content covered a little more than 3 chapters with 57 pages and 215 panels. This includes the vacant narration panels even if they technically weren't played in the show. For these chapters, there were about 319 unique cuts this episode, and after some quick math, we get a whopping 104 anime exclusive cuts this time, and you can even add a few more in if you exclude those aforementioned narration panels. So what have we learned today? Well, it's that UfoTable is the king of 3D to 2D synergy, and nothing you can say will change my mind. If you guys like this video and really want to help out, give the video a like and share it with a friend. And hey, maybe subscribe with the notification bell on for more Demon Slayer comparisons. Well, that's it for me. As always, I hope you all have a fantastic day. This is Registry, signing off.